Hey guys, welcome back to Horse 2 Cinema. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Tragedy of Macbeth, which is the latest release from the Coen brothers, Joe and Ethan Coen. These two directors are definitely some of my favorite filmmakers that are still working today. I think my favorites of theirs are probably No Country for Old Men, definitely, and also Fargo. Both of those movies do a really good job of, sort of deconstructing the darker aspects of society, but in very different ways. Fargo does it from a far more comedic perspective, sort of talking about the stupidity of criminals. Well, No Country for Old Men does something a bit similar with the main character, but of course the thing that people take away most from that movie is Anton Chigurh. And so naturally, really liking these filmmakers, I was super excited for this movie. In terms of like my background with Shakespeare and stuff, Shakespeare adaptations, I'm not exactly an expert on that at all. I pretty much just high school Shakespeare stuff. And I always actually kind of preferred his comedies. I think Twelfth Night is definitely my favorite Shakespeare play I've ever read. Something about his tragedies just kind of felt a little foreign to me in terms of like connecting to it emotionally. But still, I enjoy some of them, and I was excited for this movie. And part of why I was excited is that this movie is shot in 4:3 aspect ratio, and anytime that happens, I'm always definitely up for it. That ratio looks so good. And kind of on that note, I have to say, just from my first viewing of this, that technically, this is basically a perfect movie. In terms of all the little nuts and bolts that it takes to put together a film, I don't really see anything that they did wrong. Now, first I have to talk about the cinematography and the production design. This movie is shot in black and white, and they also have a lot of smoke and fog sort of in the background of these little sets as well. And it really puts this sense of eeriness in scenes, especially whenever the witches are involved. That's really cool. The production design is interesting. I was a little adverse to it at first because some of the walls in the castle, it looks almost like they shot it at somebody's like vacation house because some of the walls are just very plain. But in these sets there also is really a lot of intricacy put in to make it look like the time period, and I really admired that. And the scenes of where the witches are, the forest, this other town that they go to later in the movie, it all looks so good. It's such a good production design. I also really love the editing in this movie. There are a lot of shots where it will linger on that last shot of the previous scene, but then as it's lingering on that, you start to hear the dialogue transition into the next scene, and it sort of leaves you thinking about the previous scene a little bit. It sort of contextualizes it for you better. I know it's a bit of an editing cliche nowadays, but I really like it. Another technical aspect of this film that's really good is the makeup and hair design, again for the witches. So at the beginning of this film, this witch appears in one form, and later in the film she sort of appears in another form, this time in the form of an old man. And she sounds exactly like she does before, obviously, because it's the same actress, but oh my god, it looks completely like an old man. It looks like a totally different person. The makeup and hair design was so good in this movie. The performances have to be praised as well. The Denzel Washington, I would say, is definitely the main one, playing Lord Macbeth, and Frances McDormand playing Lady Macbeth. Both of them are very good, and in particular with Denzel Washington, after Macbeth sort of does things to sort of come to power, he has to sort of clean up a bunch of loose ends. And you can really feel the paranoia within his character because he really is trying to clean up all these loose ends, and he just goes completely crazy. And I think Denzel Washington in particular really brought out exactly what you want from this character. It's also very well written. Story-wise, there are some things that I struggle with, but the third act is excellent. It's a perfect build-up of all of these things that Lord Macbeth has been dreading throughout the entirety of the movie, sort of coming into fruition, and the climax is just perfect. This is a really well-executed script, for the most part. Now, I just broke down all these technical elements, but ultimately what does matter more to me with movies is how they make me feel, how I connect to them emotionally, and that's where I did struggle with this movie just a little bit. I think part of it is because this Shakespearean dialogue, obviously, it is very different than how we talk now. And in listening to it, you're sort of trying to understand exactly what they're saying, trying to sort of follow the plot a little bit. And I largely didn't have many issues following the plot. It's not that complicated of a story exactly. But within trying to follow the plot, there were certain characters that I wish I had understood more, wish I could have connected to better. A lot of the tertiary characters, the supporting cast for Lord and Lady Macbeth, and even to some extent Lady Macbeth herself, I thought there could have been a little bit more meat to be explored there in terms of how they could have brought it out, at least for me feeling it. It could have been there in the script. I mean, I just think some of that could have been lost in me trying to just follow the plot because of the dialogue. And as a result of that, I sort of felt that some of these characters, even Lady Macbeth to an extent, but definitely a lot of the supporting cast, were just kind of archetypes rather than people that you can really understand. And I totally get that that's part of the point. I mean, it's a Shakespearean tragedy. Shakespeare is one of the earliest, authors of sort of modern literature, I guess you could say. And at the time, he wrote stories that even the masses could sort of understand and try and, be entertained by. And I think what he was going for in a lot of his plays was sort of the message. Definitely in Macbeth, there's a message about the extent to which you have control over your own fate. There are certainly themes about greed and the dangers of sort of succumbing to this greed. But I did struggle a bit to sort of see how these themes were brought out in some of the characters. I didn't quite connect to them like I have certainly in other Coen brothers movies. Even Lady Macbeth, while I really liked her character, I sort of felt that a lot of the time she sort of embodied pure loyalty, at least in the first act of the movie. Of course, you see how this sort of breaks down later, but I really wish they could have spent a little bit more time on that breakdown when she was sort of falling into this sense of despair and really bring out some of those emotions that you can connect to better. The pacing is also an issue at times. I don't think this is a poorly paced movie. It definitely didn't seem that overlong, but there were times, basically whenever Denzel Washington was not on screen, things did move a little slower. This is one of those performances I think can be a little bit similar to the Joker in The Dark Knight, where the performance is so good that it sort of takes away from some of the other characters as opposed to enhancing the overall story. And I don't think that's a fault of their writing of his character. Again, I think it's more of an issue with the supporting cast. My last little issue I have with this movie is that it doesn't quite feel like a Coen brothers movie, at least at times. What I really love seeing from the Coen brothers is dark comedy, essentially. I think Fargo and even a few little moments in No Country for Old Men really bring that out super well. Both of those stories are kind of about, again, the people doing dark things, but because of their stupidity, they're sort of loose ends that they didn't clean up. Obviously, No Country for Old Men plays it much darker than Fargo does, but it's still, there are moments in both where they really bring out the dark comedy that can result from something like that. And Macbeth is almost a similar story in some ways, because Macbeth, does something horrible and he has to clean up the loose ends from that. And maybe this would have pissed off some diehard fans of Shakespeare, but I kind of wish they would have tried to bring out those dark comedy moments when it related to Macbeth a little bit better than they did. Clearly, you can feel the passion that Joel and Ethan Coen have for this story in the movie, but I just kind of wish it had a little bit more of their own unique flair to it, if that makes any sense. So overall, I really did enjoy this movie. I'm not bashing it too much at all. I would totally recommend seeing this if you get the chance. I think those issues I pointed out with it might be issues for other audience members trying to connect to the film as well, and even in some instances trying to follow the plot. But again, technically, this is a near-perfect movie. I think anyone can just go to the theater and marvel at how insanely good this movie looks and sounds. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a B+. I hope you guys enjoyed this review of The Tragedy of Macbeth. As always, make sure to like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you'd like. I've got more content coming out in the future, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you.